A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy.
Death, horror, destruction. All these words associated with one thing, the atomic bomb.
Born in 1904 in New York, J. Robert Oppenheimer earned his undergraduate degree at Harvard, then continued to study abroad. When he returned to the United States, he became a physics professor at the University of California, Berkeley. In 1941, Dr. Oppenheimer became involved in nuclear research. He was assigned the role of director at a laboratory under the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was a joint research and development project between the United States, Canada, and Great Britain. The ultimate goal was to develop the world's first atomic bomb. The project was led by Leslie Groves and Dr. Robert Oppenheimer. At its peak, there were more than 125,000 people working to achieve this goal. In today's economy, the estimated cost of the Manhattan Project would be about $30 billion. The project lasted 7 years and was prominent across several powerful countries, but still remained a top secret. There are thousands of other scientists also involved in the Manhattan Project. Most of them were located in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where it was Dr. Oppenheimer who was the director.
The first residents of Los Alamos were remarkably homogeneous. They were highly educated scientists, almost all white males and their families. They were in their 20s or 30s, healthy and middle class.
The rules at Los Alamos were incredibly strict, as this was a top secret project.
Laboratory members were not allowed personal contact with relatives outside of the compound, nor permitted to travel more than 100 miles from Los Alamos. A chance encounter with a friend outside the confines of Los Alamos had to be reported in detail to the security force.
This level of secrecy and confinement led the scientists there to work a lot, regularly 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. After working for several years, a discovery was made that using nuclear fission would allow for the intended atomic explosion to work. Nuclear fission is when a single free neutron strikes the nucleus of an atom of radioactive material, such as uranium or plutonium, and knocks 2 or 3 more neutrons free. Essentially, atoms are split apart, which releases incredible amounts of energy. Dr. Oppenheimer and his team successfully tested the first atomic bomb on July 16, 1945, in a desert near Alamogordo, New Mexico. A vehicle left Los Alamos with 1/2 of the world's supply of plutonium. This vehicle was headed 200 miles south to the testing ground for atomic bombs, Alamogordo. At the test site, there were a lot of devices scattered all across the desert that would record impacts at various distances and lasting effects in the explosion. While the test was getting ready to begin, President Truman was at Potsdam awaiting the result of the test to plan an attack on Japan. The bomb was attached to a crane that would pull it up to a tower. With all the scientists, presidents, and nations awaiting the result, the test was delayed due to a thunderstorm. The flash of the explosion was calculated to be double that of the sun. A blind girl reportedly saw the flash in a window 120 miles away shattered.
This test bomb, the Trinity, was a plutonium implosion device, and the bombs dropped on Japan closely resembled it.
The average firework has an explosive yield of about 0.013 tons of TNT.
The atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki, nicknamed the Fat Man, had a staggering 20,000 tons of TNT, meaning that it would take a total of 1.5 million fireworks to make an explosion as big as the Fat Man. Despite the nuclear testing during the Manhattan Project, nobody could foresee how much destruction the atomic bomb would cause when dropped on a city. The uranium bomb, nicknamed the Little Boy, was dropped by the Enola Gay on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. Bob Lewis, the co-pilot of the Enola Gay, cried out, "My God, what have we done?" after the bomb had been detonated. In his speech regarding the bombing of Hiroshima, J. Robert Oppenheimer said,
"Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
The bomb dropped on Hiroshima never actually made contact with the ground, and was strategically detonated at an altitude of 2,000 feet to cause maximum damage to buildings. Just 2 days after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, the United States decided to drop a more powerful plutonium bomb on Nagasaki. The bomb dropped on Nagasaki was less deadly than Hiroshima, but still killed roughly 40 to 70,000 people. The total death toll for the bombings of both cities is estimated to be between 110,000 and 210,000 deaths.
Many survivors of the nuclear blast suffered severe burns and radiation poisoning, and since 90% of medical professionals were killed and 42 out of 45 hospitals were rendered non-functional, injured survivors had nowhere to go to be treated.
All of the dedicated burn beds across the entire world would not be enough to care for all the surviving burn victims of a single nuclear bomb dropped on any city.
Survivors who were lucky enough to not be burned saw an increase of leukemia, thyroid, breast, lung, and other cancers.
The atomic bombing completely destroyed the city of Hiroshima. Everything from infrastructure to transportation and communication facilities, and even water and sewage systems.
It was so dark because of the smoke and dust being sucked up in the mushroom cloud, and the ghostly procession. I say ghostly because they just didn't look like human beings. Their hair was just all standing up towards the sky. They were burned and blackened and swollen. Parts of the bodies were missing, and they were covered with blood, and clothes were tattered, and the flesh and skin hanging from their bones.
There was a man, I think he was a man, unrecognizably burned, scarred, and marred. You can't tell, but I knew that was a man. He said to soldiers who's clutching me in his arm, he said, "Water, water, please, water."
Hold me, and she took my hand. The moment we entered the house, came tremendous flash. It's like 1,000 lightning at the same time. It was so strong. So my mother pulled me down floor and covered my body with her body. Then came tremendous explosion, and we heard many things flying over our body. Then all of a sudden, total silent. So we stood up. We saw the window and the doors and the roofs were disappeared. A tremendous destruction. My sister was feeling some oily liquid running down from her head, but we couldn't see anything because the shelter was so dark. We stayed about 10 or 15 minutes. My mother decided to take us to the community shelter. So we came out into the light. We saw her head covered, small piece of glass. She was bleeding. And so my mother carefully take all of the glass and clean up the blood.
It took until the mid-1950s for Hiroshima and Nagasaki to be rebuilt to the size that they were prior to the bombings in 1945.
The world was not aware of the mass destruction these bombs would cause. The pure destruction caused fear across the world and swayed many opinions about whether these types of weapons were necessary.
Politicians and world leaders knew that this show of force meant the start of a new era of war, one that could easily erase humanity from the planet.
The Soviet Union, the second strongest nation in the world at that time, was a thought in the back of the minds of the United States when dropping this weapon. They knew that showing off such force would intimidate the Soviet Union, but didn't realize that it would intimidate countries everywhere. Talk about the morality of nuclear weapons soon became a public debate.
Many people started to say that the nuclear weapons were not necessary to defeat the Japanese, and that using them was not right.
To this day, opinions vary. United States officials argue that using atomic bombs was a means to a faster end to the Pacific conflict that would ensure fewer conventional war casualties. If the war continued for longer, there is a risk of more U.S. infantrymen casualties. Dropping bombs on Japan and forcing surrender eliminated the risk.
Some people like to argue that had nuclear weapons never been used, the war would not have ended. This belief is built on information that says Japan had a plan of mass suicide, ready to use millions of their own citizens as soldiers and sacrifices to allow Japan to keep fighting the US.
While this plan seems frightening on paper, it most likely would not have worked effectively if it was ever deployed. Japanese civilians would not have willingly sacrificed themselves, and even if they did try and fight, the US military would not have easily been defeated by such a scheme.
This plan, and any other methods the Japanese tried to use to stay fighting, would have failed in the end. Their loss was inevitable even without the bombs, demonstrated by the increased pressure from the US military leading up to the bombings.
This argument was easily refuted and shows that whether the United States dropped the bombs or not, Japan would have been defeated, making the use of nuclear weapons unnecessary.
Today, 9 nations have nuclear weapons.
These nations are Russia, the United States, China, France, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea.
Together, these countries hold about 13,000 nukes. A majority belong to the United States at 5,889 and Russia at 5,224. The modern nuke is far more powerful than the bombs dropped on Japan.
Modern-day nuclear weapons are estimated to be about 3,000 times more powerful than the original plutonium implosion device. These weapons are also more sophisticated. Instead of being dropped by a plane, they can be launched via a missile from thousands of miles away and land with pinpoint accuracy.
Осталось 3 секунды. 2, 1, 0.
In 1961, Russia tested the Tsar Bomba, the most powerful nuclear weapon ever tested, with an explosive yield of 50,000 tons of TNT.
Полевой столб, поднимающийся с земли, быстро увеличился в объеме. Через несколько секунд после взрыва диаметр полевого столба составлял около 10 километров.
The mushroom cloud from the explosion was 25 miles wide at the base and 60 miles wide at the top, and would vaporize everything within a 3.7-mile radius.
Оно достигло высоты 60-65 километров.
At a diplomatic scale, any conflict that might end with the use of these devices could result in unparalleled destruction and loss of life. Nuclear weapons are a significant concern for global security.
Bringing these types of weapons into the world may have been the greatest mistake in the history of mankind.